And now to worries about austerity measures in Europe. There was new fallout today from the continent's debt crisis. In Ireland, the government announced elections are likely next month after Prime Minister Brian Cowen resigned as leader of his political party. And in Spain, officials said that troubled banks there need $27 billion in fresh capital. NewsHour economics correspondent Paul Salman has an update, part of his ongoing reporting on making sense of financial news.
As 2011 festively dawned across Europe, economists there brooded. For all the celebration, was Europe's financial system about to implode? Greece and Ireland alone were hobbled by more than $500 billion in debt costing more and more to refinance as investors lost faith. Would European Union survive? Would its currency, the euro? Now, since the NewsHour faces financial pressures of its own, cost consciousness trumped a trip to Europe, and we opted instead for a grand tour of Denver, where Europeans were among the roughly 10,000 so-called dismal scientists attending America's annual economics convention. At plausibly appropriate venues, we interviewed visiting European economists, starting with one from Iceland.
Okay, I hope you'll bear with the hokiness here, but Iceland, so we took you to the ice rink.
Oh, I'm warmer at home on most days, actually.
You're warmer at home?
Yes, so...
Thor Gilferson's country experienced the first of Europe's financial ice storms and provides some perhaps useful lessons. Like everywhere else, the crisis boiled down to bankers making bad loans.
The banks lost 7 times the value of Iceland's national income in a given year.
And yet,
our unemployment is measured in single digits. Our income did not plunge very deep.
So why isn't Iceland, if you'll pardon the expression in this context, not flat on its rear? How come Iceland is coming back?
Icelandic authorities made several right decisions after the crash. They called in the IMF.
Iceland's economy actually grew in the last quarter of the year. Partly that's because Iceland's currency has depreciated, boosting its exports, and because the government didn't bail out the banks. Instead, with the International Monetary Fund's help, it modified its loan agreements with foreign creditors to pay back maybe 40% over years of what its banks borrowed. In Greece, the government is still struggling. Its debt was run up by the state itself, hiring too many government workers with too generous pensions while collecting too little in taxes to pay the tab. When reporting there last summer, 2 questions hung over Athens like smog. Would Greeks stomach a lower standard of living when jobs and pensions were slashed? Would tax collection be reformed?
So much negative that is being said about Greece.
At Denver's Civic Center Park, we asked Dimitri Vayanos whether 7 months later, progress had been made.
Is the average person paying her or his taxes?
Not fully. And of course everybody wants everybody else to pay their taxes. If Greece was able to collect taxes according to the European Union average, at this point there would not have been any debt problem right now.
Are you personally more or less hopeful or the same as you were in July?
Now I'm a bit less hopeful because some of the people in the government are not fully understanding of what needs to happen, or somehow things are not moving as fast as they could be moving.
Yes, says Vayanos, the government is making tough budget cuts, but tax reform is being held up in the courts, and red tape still restrains economic growth as it has for decades. Ireland's crisis, by contrast, has come as a surprise. After booming for decades, it too is now crushed by debt. We took Canis Prendergast to an Irish pub, if not to drown his country's sorrows, at least to explain them.
We had housing prices going up on the order of 15% a year for quite a long time. Everybody was buying a second home. Everybody was building additions to their houses. People didn't give perhaps as much pause as they should have.
To paraphrase bank robber Willie Sutton, real estate is where the money was, where the bank loans went, until they went bad. Unlike Iceland, Ireland assumed the debts of its failing banks. It now owes creditors, mainly European banks and the IMF, more than its entire GDP.
And I think most people think that they're unsustainable.
So then I'm obliged to ask you the central question: do you default sometime in the future?
I think we do. I think at that point, then everything gets restructured.
Ultimately, that is, Ireland will renegotiate the terms of its debt with foreign investors, as Iceland is doing. But wait a moment. If Iceland stiffs its lenders, Greece is broke, and Ireland's debts are unsustainable, what happens to European creditors? That's the question playfully posed in this Australian comedy routine that's gone viral on the internet. A mock quiz show.
Correct. How much does Ireland owe?
865 billion.
Correct. And who do they owe it to?
Other European economies, mostly.
Correct.
The host is pretending to quiz the contestant, a financial consultant named Roger.
Correct. And how are Germany, France and Britain going, Roger?
Well, they're struggling a bit, aren't they?
Correct. Why?
Because they've lent all these vast amounts of money to other European economies that can't possibly pay them back.
Correct. So what are they going to do?
They're going to have to bail them out.
Correct. Where are they getting the money to do that, Roger?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that one.
Again, Professor Prendergast.
Nobody knows quite how bankrupt the entire system is. And I think that's the huge concern in the EU at the moment, and the huge concern for Ireland, which is what are we likely to see when these cards eventually end up falling? I think the smart money at the moment thinks Spain and Italy might be the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Spain, the world's 10th largest economy. Like Ireland, it's suffered a crippling real estate implosion that threatens its regional banks, and thus the state itself, if it has to salvage them. At a tapas restaurant, our Spanish expert Thanos Santos elaborated.
The problem are the loans to real estate developers and loans to construction companies. Between both of them is around 450 billion euros.
So in U.S. terms, that's $7 trillion in potentially bad loans.
That's exactly right.
Unlike Ireland, Spain hasn't bailed out the banks that financed the bubble yet. But there's now serious talk that it will.
This is a very important question. It's whether Spain is going to go the Irish route and start bailing out troubled financial institutions. This is something that should not happen. I hope that our authorities have learned from the Irish experience on what a catastrophic route this is.
So finally, what about Germany, whose banks so indulgently finance the debt of its neighbors? Germany is the backstop for current plans to expand Europe's bailout fund. But at Denver's Café Berlin, economist Harald Uhlig said Germans are now feeling put upon.
They're unhappy, right? They recognize that Greece has lived beyond its means, that there was a big housing boom in Spain, that there was a huge expansion in Ireland, big credit expansion in Ireland, and now they also pay for all that. And this is particularly disappointing because, the Germans have been told at the beginning of the monetary union that there would be no bailout clause, right? This has been told to them in millions of times.
And yet, Germany keeps being tapped.
Germany doesn't have pockets that are deep enough to bail out half of Europe. They can't bail out Ireland and Greece and Italy and Spain and Portugal. It's just too much. If Spain were to fall, if there was a bailout of Spain, then you would see serious discussions in Germany about a breakup of the Eurozone and, fracturing of Europe down the road. And I think that would be a bad prospect indeed after, spending so many decades of getting Europe coming together. It would be a big price to pay.
And a potentially big price for us all.